to ask questions or engage in dialogue where they see fit. With that, I turn the mic over to our co-chairs, Assemblymember Fred Thiel and Senator Kevin Thomas.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, or still good morning, I guess. Good morning, everybody. My name is Fred Thiel. I am the Assemblyman from the 1st Assembly District, which is where we are today, and also the co-chair with Senator Thomas of the Lipa Commission. I first want to thank the town of Southampton for hosting us today, Supervisor Jay Schneiderman, who is here, and we have members of the town board who we will see later because they're going to be testifying. So I want to thank you for your hospitality. And so after meetings in Far Rockaway and in Nassau County and Mineola and Hauppauge, the last meeting is here in Southampton. So I welcome my colleagues, and we'll introduce all of our colleagues. But on the Assembly side, we've got Assembly Member Michaela Szilagyi and Assembly Member Khalil Anderson from Nassau County and Queens, respectively. They are Assembly members, and the Senator will introduce his members when he makes his remarks. So just to kind of give you the sense of where we are, this commission was formed about a year ago. It really was in response to the failures of PSE&G Long Island after Tropical Storm Isaias. There were a whole host of studies that were done after that, including those by the Public Service Commission and Lipa itself. Lipa was looking at alternatives to the current makeup, which was short-circuited when the contract of PSE&G was extended. But members of the legislature, unhappy with what happened after that tropical storm, wanted to look at the issue of public power, which was what was originally intended for the Long Island Power Authority. It had two purposes when it was created in 1986. One was to close the Shoreham nuclear power plant, which happened. The second was to take over LILCO. And while ultimately LIPA did take over LILCO, since then, since 1998, they've always contracted the operation of the system to a private utility company, whether it be Keyspan, then National Grid, and now PSE&G. And there have been troubles all along the way with that third-party manager system. And that's what we have. We have a public authority that contracts to a third-party manager. It's the only one in the country. Amazingly, since 1998, nobody has wanted to copy what we're doing here on Long Island. And the reason for that is it hasn't worked very well. And that is why this commission is looking at the issue of full public power. As Mr. Landsman said, we began our work earlier this year. We had public hearings, including one here in Southampton. That produced a draft report, which is online, which is really the subject of today's hearing. That report was also reviewed by the state controller. We've had a second look at the numbers by a second consultant. And now we are at the point of having hearings on that draft report with the goal of producing a final report by the end of November. And the issues that we're really focused on, if you look at the draft report, the issue of governance is a key issue. Right now, LIPA, there are 9 members of the Board of Trustees, and we won't make you name all 9 of them, or any of them, if you're able to. But we can say this, that all 9 are appointed by officials in Albany and not here on Long Island. The LIPA board, regardless of political party, has always been controlled by the governor. The governor has had the majority number of appointments, but the others are made by the Assembly Speaker and the Assembly Majority Leader, none of which live on Long Island. So one of the issues with governance that we've been looking at is bringing governance closer to the people here on Long Island, having appointments that are more locally made. So governance is something we're really focused on. We would appreciate any testimony on that. And then the other major issue that we've heard, and I'm sure we'll continue to hear about today, is labor. And it is the express position in the draft report, and I think of every member of this commission, both houses, both parties, that we want to see the labor force, the unionized labor force, continue as they have, with the benefits that they've always had, their pensions, continue to be private sector employees, and the report focuses on that, and that's a key issue also for us. There's also the role of the Comptroller's Office, the role of DPS Long Island, and certainly the numbers. I think the other thing all of us are united on here, regardless of party and regardless of house, is that it can't cost more money than to have a public power company than what we do now. Nobody wants to pay higher utility rates. In fact, in spite of the fact that, amazingly to me, many people have said how affordable the current rates are, that's not typically what I hear from constituents. But it's imperative that this not cost more and hopefully save some money. So that is really what we've been focused on, and we look forward to hearing from you today on all of those issues and more, anything relating to LIPA and PSE&G. And at this juncture, I want to turn it over to my co-chair, State Senator Kevin Thomas.
Thank you and good morning. Thank you to my co-chair, Assemblymember Thiel. Everything he said is exactly what I wanted to say in my opening, but he beat me to it, everyone. But I want to add, in addition to governance and labor, we are also looking at accountability. You know, how do we hold a public entity like this accountable if they fail us? So all of these factored in go into the final report. You know, we have toured Long Island and Queens. We've heard from experts. We heard from ratepayers. We heard from elected officials. We want to do this right. And we will always keep you in mind when we, pass any sort of legislation up in Albany. That being said, I'm here with one of our commissioners, Senator Palumbo. He's been great at putting in his 2 cents as well about all of these things. So looking forward to the hearing today and listening to experts and the public weighing in. Thank you.
And also because this is also Senator Palumbo's district, and we have, we always let the hometown members say a few words, as we did in Queens and Nassau County. I wanted to give the senator a chance to say a few words.
Well, I think you've both summed it up quite significantly that, we're all unified in our role as commissioners. This is to make a better product for the ratepayer, control affordability. We need to also keep in mind that we now have a CLCPA. We have a Climate Leadership Community Protection Act that is going to require some infrastructure costs and so forth. So we do have a big picture in mind as well, that we have a lot of goals that need to be achieved in the next 10, 15, 20 years that also will be part of this. So we need to keep, and we are going to, without question, all be on the same page, which I think we are certainly focused on doing. Creating the best product. Is it ever something easy? LIPA is always an easy target for, any utility is typically an easy target for someone to throw daggers, because obviously nobody wants to continue to have to pay for services when they're not reliable in certain circumstances. Whatever it may be, and I'm not suggesting that they are. I'm just saying this kind of as a general broad stroke comment, but thank you for allowing me to say a few words, and I look forward to the hearing.
Okay, it's time to hear from the public. Rory, let's have our...
You got it. Okay, so our first witness is John Bouvier, council member, and then we will have Tommy John Scavone, apologies, also a council member. Please limit your remarks to 3 to 5 minutes, and you're up,
Talking to
sir.
an elected official, how is that possible? Shall I start?
Yes.
Please.
Is Tom Gogol in the room from 27 East, he's not good. So I'm going to, Tom Gagola, in an article for 27 East, recently wrote that the Long Island Power Authority was always supposed to be a public utility since its creation in 1986. But that's not quite the way it worked out, and I agree with him, and I was hoping he'd be here because I wanted to thank him for the article. As this commission's notes in their April 2023 report, the unique third-party model lacks accountability and efficiency, as so many studies and analyses of LIPA's shortcomings over the years have documented. A transformation is necessary, the commission noted, because for decades, LIPA has been the only utility in the United States using a third-party service provider model to deliver its services, and this model has too often failed to provide cost-effective and reliable service to LIPA ratepayers. A restructured and reorganized LIPA, were to directly manage the operation of Long Island's electric grid, could save taxpayers between $50 and $80 million a year, the report notes. I should also note that a working relationship and climate between the authority, utility, and municipalities is contrary to our mutual goals. The town of Southampton is actively pursuing CCA, Community Choice Aggregation, a New York State approved program that enables municipalities to accelerate the transition to clean energy and improve cost benefits on behalf of residents and small businesses, and CDG, which is Community Distributed Generation, that's locally produced power, that is making a difference in our clean energy future and creating an exciting new chapter of renewable energy in New York. We are also quickly growing space in our energy future as more and more renewable energy sources emerge in our efforts to meet our New York State renewable energy goals and emission standards that are critical for a myriad of obvious reasons. Here in our town, we have many low, moderate, and fixed income residents that are directly affected by the high price of electric energy, estimated to be the fourth highest in the nation, and produced over 90% by fossil fuel production. We need a true public power authority on Long Island to equitably meet these efforts and goals and critical priorities. And I wanted to thank members of the committee and chairs for all the work that you've done. And I certainly support what you've produced and support what your report says. Thank you.
John, I have a question, there may be others, but I wanted to focus primarily because you and I have worked on this, the CCA program that you mentioned. And, you know, this is something that we run into a lot, is that, you know, the CCA was a program that other parts of the state, all other parts of the state were able to benefit from, with certain rules and orders that have been put down by the State Public Service Commission, but not Long Island, because LIPA is not subject to the Public Service Commission jurisdiction, and there was a completely different program for Long Island. Could you just comment, and we ended up having to do special state legislation to ensure that Long Islanders had the same rights on CCA as the rest of the state. But could you just maybe comment a little bit further, maybe expand upon the difficulties that you had here on Long Island with that kind of program versus the experience in the rest of the state?
Sure. Well, I guess I should describe what community choice aggregation is. In simplest terms, we have a third-party administrator that we hire to go and buy electrical power from different sources, renewable being one of them. Obviously, that's critical to many goals. We have a global responsibility, we have a local responsibility here on Long Island, and particularly in Southampton, we have energy goals that we're trying to meet. And CCA it appears to be that tool for us, one tools for us. The difficulty in initiating that, as you well know, we ended up having, I think, the tariff had to be initiated. We had to get PSC involved. It was a real uphill battle over time. I always felt that we were being competitive with the very utility that we're trying to work with, and that to me that was always the problem. I don't know if you want me to go into more depth, but it was just a very difficult road to get to. The process we're in right now is that we've issued the RFPs, which we sent out RFPs under CCA to get numbers back from them as to the price per kilowatt hour for certain fuel sources, renewable and otherwise. So it's not just renewable, but that's obviously part of the goal. That has to at least meet or exceed or be below the price per kilowatt hour for our local residents. That's the goal that we had set for ourselves. And there are people who want to spend more money because they want to actually use renewable fuels for everything, and that's their prerogative. And under this program that happens, trying to work with the utility to find places to hook up, what those costs would be, all the things that you can imagine you would have to do in order to be able to put the energy that we would buy into the grid became a point of contention in some ways.
Let me just ask you about one other aspect of this, especially since you're an elected official. One is governance, and I mentioned in the outset, all 9 members or political appointments that happen in Albany. In things like such as CCA, if we did have a board that was where the appointments were made here, maybe by local government here on Long Island, would have some of those appointments really closer to the people. You think that would make a difference when you're dealing with issues such as CCA?
I do. If you recall, Mike Gordon, who's here from Jewel, had made a presentation to you at the first time you were all here, and showed how our grid is intensely tight, for lack of a better term. It's very hard to find interconnect points in it because it's so old. It hasn't been updated. It's very hard to add new fuel sources, particularly under CDG. If we want to put a solar array, we have to find places where that's cost effective to do that. And that's something that local people in the local municipality would have a better understanding of and would be able to work to guide that, to help decide where that makes sense and where it doesn't make sense. That goes to storage, it goes to a whole bunch of other issues in that regard. So I absolutely think that's one of the problems that we've had is sort of the communication. If you start to think about it, when you get a bill, that has to be reflected on the bill, where that energy came from, particularly with CCA. That all has to be handled at a local level, particularly with those types of programs. So the simple answer is yes, but it's a complicated question to answer.
Thank you. I wanted to point out we're joined by Assemblymember Doug Smith, also from Suffolk County, so on the Assembly side. Is there any other members that have any questions?
And I caught your testimony while I was parking, so.
Oh, okay.
I was watching live, the live stream's working.
And I thought the mic was off.
All right, Senator Palumbo.
Just a quick follow-up, John. How are you? Good morning. So, how do you reconcile that conflict when you have CCA and you have some residents and individuals who are saying, regardless of cost, we need to get renewable, we want to go all renewable, and then there's obviously a dynamic like, well, there are other people who don't feel that way. We're trying to at least break even, maybe even save a few bucks when we're buying other energy. How do you reconcile that? Who is in charge of that? If you could just explain that to all of us.
You mean here locally?
Yeah.
Well, you have the option of, start simply, you want to put solar on your roof. That offsets your cost. That is either put back into the grid, not as a real electron, but it's done through a process that defines how much energy you produced, and that's deducted from your bill and otherwise. Where that becomes a problem is, number one, what the cost is to do that. Wherever you have opportunities to add cost to something, somebody will see that and add a cost to it. And it negates the whole purpose of what we're trying to do. Now, some people, we have, as I said, we have low to moderate income people where the price per kilowatt hour here is significant, and it does affect them in a very real way. How can we help them do that? Well, we do that. Some of the renewable energy projects can help them. With localized CDG, we can help do that. We can produce local power. We have a little more control over it, how it's distributed, who it's distributed to. That's why I think working with a utility, with the power authority, is important, that we're all on the same page, having the same goals. Particularly when the state mandates certain things that we have to do, then we have to do them. But we have to also work with an authority, a power authority that wants to do that too. And it's not just an opportunity for revenue, but we're working to the goal of actually helping our constituents who do suffer. And in the Hamptons, we have this, everybody thinks everybody's rich here, and they're not. We have people that have real needs. And that's why we're trying to implement CCA for that reason. I hope that answers your
Sure, it does. So the final decision is, of course, made by the board, right? And ultimately,
Yes.
and how they
Yes,
move
it is.
forward. And just a general comment that I'm solar on my house, which is great. The only wrinkle is, when the kids think that it's actually free, you can hang meat in my living room in the summer. So we need to let them know that we still need to conserve, kids. But anyway, thanks. Thank you.
Any other-
And just to add to that, that there are, and when I noted that sort of the competitive environment that we have, that the utility and the authority, that everyone has their kind of programs that they're putting out there, all for ostensibly the same reason, but it doesn't always work out that way. And to work with the community, I think, is much more effective for a power authority, particularly when we have these new emerging technologies that are coming that we can take full advantage of. Offshore wind, you may not or may not agree with it. You can buy it or you can't, or you don't have to. Solar, tidal energy, a lot of these things are emerging that we're gonna have to deal with in the future. And I think that's really critical. In your report, you refer to it, and the only suggestion I would be is that you make it a firm, hard statement that in the future, you're gonna have to be dealing with these problems. Let's deal with them now while we can.
Sure. And that was relative to my comment that I made at the beginning, that, when you think about the ultimate infrastructure costs will be in the hundreds of millions, if not billions, and the price of capital is cheaper for a municipal agency than it is for a private agency.
Good
So in the
point.
event that we need to ultimately raise capital, that will probably all be passed off to the ratepayer. It's cheaper to have a municipal agency get the money than private. So that's another really significant issue that I think we've all acknowledged. And
Yeah, and
we're trying to digest.
municipal-
It's not an easy answer, as you can see.
No, it's not, and it's also the municipality that drives the grid in many ways, both in its function and design, right? So where we have higher power requirements, that sort of, that trickles down into the way that grid is designed. And this grid in particular is saturated right now. So serious money is going to have to be spent on it if we're going to meet the goals that we're mandated to do by both the state and the country and the global crisis and climate change and sea level rise.
Exactly. Yep. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next will be Councilman Schiavone, and after him will be Mr. Mike Gordon.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And
How's
welcome
it
to
feel to be on that
Southampton.
side of the table?
It's interesting. Not my first time, though. In fact, the last time I was at this podium was speaking to this very commission. So I want to thank the chairs coming out here, Senator Thomas, Assemblyman Thiel, and the rest of the panel for being out here and working on this important issue. And Senator Thomas, I also experienced what you experienced by following Councilman Bouvier, who took many of the points that we here in Southampton are concerned about. So thank you, Councilman.
Hey, just for the record, we let Senator Thomas go first in Nassau County.
Oh, is that right?
No.
Senator Palumbo, one thing I'd like to add to our CCA system is that we do provide an opt-out provision for folks who want to go the more conventional method. Hopefully, it's a new method that this commission will establish, but there is an opt-out provision there. So I was here earlier when you were here in the springtime, and I fully support what you all are doing. And I had advocated for a publicly elected board. I understand that may or may not necessarily be in the cards, but the trustee selection of this board is crucial. Assemblyman Thiel, you noted that in the beginning, and right now we do not have control over this monopoly, and this is what I consider it. This is a geographic monopoly. It is owned by the people of Nassau, Suffolk County, the Rockaways,
And Queens, thank you. I always take care of Queens.
Thank you.
Rockaways, right?
We're on the grid.
Yeah.
Shout out to you, Cliff.
Absolutely. So, it's the people of our districts that should be in control of this. So I implore the commission to make sure that a majority of the trustees have some kind of accountability to Long Island and Queens so that, we actually have say in this thing as it moves forward. Albany's a long place, a long way away, and a lot of the officials that are elected statewide may or may not have the same interests as we do. So 3 main points. That was one. Local control is imperative. The other, collective bargaining agreements. Through no fault of their own, the workers who provide the electricity, who work on the poles, those need to be maintained, those collective bargaining agreements. So thank you for keeping that in your draft plan, and I hope that that moves forward in that capacity. And, you know, the other thing that I want to say to this panel is that the legislature didn't have to do this. You probably could have let the contract renew in 2025, but you are working on this because you see that there is a problem here, and that this third-party setup that we have out here on Long Island and Queens it just isn't, you know, optimal. And so I appreciate all of your time and all of your work, and I look forward to have this thing passing in the next session. So thank you.
Thanks, Tommy John. And, you know, during the first round of hearings, we spoke a lot. We heard a lot of testimony, a lot of discussion amongst ourselves with regard to an elected board. And there was a lot of interest in an elected board. But we had a number of policy considerations that we wanted to promote. And one is a more accountable board to people on Long Island, and the other was to protect labor. Mm-hmm. And those collided because in the draft report, you know, we were advised by our attorneys that to best protect labor, particularly their rights under the National Labor Relations Board that they have, and to maintain those, that an appointed board would be considered more favorably, you know, as far as continued federal jurisdiction than an elected board. So kind of the fallback position was, well, an appointed board, but more local control. And that's kind of how we got to where we are, at least with that issue. You know, so it wasn't just, well, let's just abandon the idea of an elected board. There was a rationale.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sure there
behind
was.
that.
And I hope that you include the counties with that, or, you know, that would be fantastic. Or even the town of Southampton, we would be more than happy to appoint a member of the board here. But I know that we're one of 10
And it
in
also
Suffolk
points
County.
out, I think, also the key role that a citizens advisory committee would play, or could play in Lipa's future, you know, where they have, you know, real input, there's real interplay between the Board of Trustees and the citizens. That's another mechanism, I think, to foster local control.
One that the trustees would meet with regularly and
Exactly.
get real input from that. Okay.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Mike Gordon.
Let me
And
turn off my cell phone. For some reason, I thought I had it turned off.
okay. And then after Mr. Gordon is, thank you, is Jennifer Harrison. Mr. Gordon, you're up.
Thank you. Now, I am hopeful this was not set up, and we are not. I hope that more than sounding like an obstinate bass voice in the room, that I'm looking to connect a lot of what we feel is right to some of the more pragmatic issues related to funding. So that when, and maybe opportunities to enrich the report as well. So, and the report is a great piece of work. I want to congratulate you guys on the work, you team, men and women, on the work that you've done. A couple of things. One, there's a lot of reference to community engagement. And I think that the more practical community agency that you can bring into actual agency and local connection and control, the more powerful it'll be for a couple of reasons. So when you look at funding, the report talks a lot about FEMA eligibility, and and it's way more than FEMA eligibility from my perspective. It's all of the BIL and the IRA is related to Justice 40 initiatives, and community agency is really powerful, not just focusing on equity issues, but community control is also very important. And if you can, I don't know if you will, but references to Justice 40, community agency, workforce development from local on up, and governance construct, I think it'll help with respect to LIPA funding. So let's scoot on to, yeah, I'm going to scoot over this because it's a basic, it's the basic plan, which is which John has begun to describe. It's distributed energy resources for the benefit of the disadvantaged communities, and it is power purchase decisions, which, yes, if we move to power purchase decisions, John has mentioned that, that next month, the board, and to clarify your question, it will be the board that will be making that decision, should have the opportunity to make a decision with respect to electricity supply on behalf of residents. And the board will make the decision, the degree to which the default offering is renewable. Anybody can opt out, but that will be the board's decision. And in this contract or the next, we expect that the Southampton board will have the option of contracting with the offshore wind, which is why the picture is up there. And the thing to keep note of in future LIPA contracts is that when LIPA does power purchase agreements, they are for energy and capacity. We really believe that it'll make LIPA more cautious if they are consistently on the bypassable portion of the bill to create a vibrant local market. So let's move on. We already have. And so the second piece that we're referencing is the development of local resources. And I think that as we incorporate municipal authority in the development of local resources and as much local authority as we can into the LIPA charter, it means that those local resources can be integrated into the local plan, and that's critical. So let's take a look at the next one. And this is just one case study of a 4.6 megawatt piece, which is being built on a local capped landfill. And you're looking at some of the jobs created, but it creates more than workforce development. It actually creates hiring. So if we can move on from here as well. And I'd like to spotlight legislation that Assemblymember Teal was referencing earlier. And that legislation is critical for equity opportunities on the island. It's not just Assemblymember Teal, it's Pete Harcum, and it is the state and local clean energy partnership. This is just one example of this one project and what it means. When you go door to door to subscribe community distributed generation or community solar, what happens is that the door-to-door folks and the folks who are ringing at night are ringing rich people. That's just the way it is. But when the community has the capability to designate where those 20 years of bill credits go, the community, and Southampton in this case, would like to focus this project, and Assemblymember Teal's legislation would enable the community to do this, specifically on these 719 families who will get 20 years of bill credits. This is their decision.
Mr. Gordon?
Yeah.
You've exceeded the 5 minutes.
Oh.
So if you want to just bring it to a quick close, please do.
Okay, cool. Let's quick go here. You've seen this. It's the constrained grid. If we move to the next one, local agency, so there's $523 million that
Gordon.
LIPA will hear
Mr.
about
Gordon,
next
Mr. Gordon.
week or
Your-
2 weeks
your-
from now?
Your next sentence needs to start with "in conclusion."
Okay.
And then the members have opportunity to
Okay,
ask you
cool,
questions. Thank you.
absolutely cool. So from this, if LIPA gets the money, in conclusion, there will be 819 megawatts built on these 48 loops. The question is, and for Justice 40 reasons and for community agency regions, the question is, what will they provide the local communities? And where will they be built? Where will those, and that is dependent on smart governance decisions and actual local agency. And I will end it there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You referenced the State and Local Clean Energy Partnership Act, which we did introduce late last session. So I just wanted to point out that it was late in the session. It's obviously, just going through the presentation here, a fairly complex policy issue. So it's something that didn't really get a chance to get a full hearing, at the end of session. Those of us around the table remember that the budget was late and the time for legislation was fairly compressed at the end of session this year, but it is a priority for 2024. We look forward to working with you. I guess my question, and maybe this will lead into some of the things you wanted to talk about, but with that initiative which you described, and how do you see a fully public power company, a public authority, helping with that regard, in that regard?
I think that if you have, whether it's elected or appointed, I have my feelings, but you know what, big deal. You've got the issues that you understand far better than I. But as you build that, if the agency is developing specifically community benefit plans and community benefit agreements related to ownership, it will open up a good deal. So FEMA's like $1 billion, LIPA's spending $700 to $900 million a year on grid upgrades. But there's way more available, and it'll open up because they score roughly 20 points out of 100 in just about every federal application. So specifically integrating that into a charter, I think would be really powerful, well beyond FEMA dollars, with future grant submissions, with the Loan Programs Office, which has $416 billion, which is low interest capital. So you were discussing municipal capital. And so it all becomes a virtuous circle, and you need the flexibility that your Clean Energy Partnership Act will provide, and as local as you can possibly get with respect to ownership here or election of the board would be a powerful synergy.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
Yes, I had a question. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Gordon. So just so I understand correctly, is this your proposed structure, governance structure, for the Long Island Power Authority?
I read the report. I don't pretend to understand the union issues that you've articulated. I do think that if appointments are local, it'll be powerful with respect to community agency, whether it's appointments or elections. I think that'll be pretty darn powerful. So with respect to structure and also with respect to community agency, if it's in the charter that the community, grid upgrades, the community should be involved very early. Doesn't mean that they should be decision makers with agency. They should be involved early. But with respect to what actually is built on those lines and where it's built and the communities that it serves, I do believe that there should be prioritization to community agency in that process. Maybe it's in the charter, maybe it's in the governance, I'm not really sure, or
Okay.
I have my
But you
opinions.
support
they're-
some elements of what was in the report plus.
Absolutely.
And then can you
Yeah,
speak?
yes,
sorry.
yes, and
Yes,
basically.
and, okay. That's the ampersand, I think.
Yes.
Yes, and. But in any case, also, can you speak a little bit more to the 523 million in investments? Is that something that's
Yeah.
already in the works that you're
a good
proposing that
question.
those dollars are spent otherwise? Because remember,
It's a good question.
the Power Authority has a management fee that I'm sure is included in that. So if you cut them out, it probably brings that number up or down depending where it is.
Yeah.
So can you speak to that?
So the Power Authority, in late May, proposed to the federal government that it receive $250 million of grants, and it would supplement that with $275 million of its own, whether it's borrowing capacity or ratepayer, it was not clear. And they identified the 48 distribution loops that they would actually upgrade for that $523 million. They will find out, supposedly they said late summer they're going to start issuing decisions on the federal government grant. The federal government, through the Grid Resilience Innovation Program, the federal government encouraged Lipa to submit for that money, and it is fortnight perhaps before we hear whether they get those dollars.
Got it. Thank you. And I'm looking at this, the Queens Loop. Looks like this is one of the larger, more extensive loops, separate from this one here near Middle Island. So does that impact how much is being invested based on the size of the loops? And
Boy,
it's hard to see the map,
yeah,
but this
I
is a
know.
really good rendering.
And they did not go
Yeah.
into detail in their proposal. I would imagine that the larger the loop, the more money
Yeah,
that
of course.
it will invest. And it's not to say that this is all that Lipa's putting in, because they put in 900 million a year, or 7 to 900 million a year. But I do expect that where they're larger and where the capacities are larger,
Yeah.
it's gonna be more money.
Okay.
And there'll be more megawatts available there as well.
I made a mistake though. This large loop is, I'm trying to read it, but this is Gilgo Beach. I want, if you got another map that kind of zooms in on Queens, I want to see what that loop looks like.
Okay,
Those are my questions.
deal.
Thank you.
So my question, listening to you, and I believe you testified last round of hearings
Yes.
as well. I remember a similar slideshow. So now, this time my question is, are you suggesting that I represent Islip and Brookhaven townships. Are you suggesting that the townships of Islip and Brookhaven be incentivized to build their own either renewable energy or energy generating plants? Or are you suggesting that we exchange one private entity that is PSEG Long Island with dozens and dozens of other private companies?
Both. So that in the IRA, there's money for, it's called direct pay, which is across like 14, 15 different sub-agencies. So Brookhaven can actually own their own and get direct pay federal dollars for doing that. So Brookhaven could in fact own their own stuff, and it could also create lease payments from myriad private companies that are working elsewhere. I am suggesting though that it is in your jurisdiction to decide what you want to be built and why.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions?
Just a quick comment. Regarding that, even municipal ownership, I guess, of,
Yeah.
for example, a solar array. I've had these discussions with some town supervisors and some up west as well. You know, the headache that's involved with that,
Yeah.
and the the fluctuation
Yeah.
of revenue. I know that
Yeah.
there were some discussions that they would be interested in lease payments, maybe leasing
Yeah.
the old landfill, for example, and say, you know what, we can budget for it. We'll take a number, knock yourselves out, private industry. I
Yeah.
hope you make millions so we can all eat. That's one just comment that I had. And secondly, regarding the elected board, in addition to the comments Assemblyman Thiel mentioned regarding labor, and this is a good, and I say this being so naive to the process in 2013, I never carried a petition, I never ran for office. I thought it'd be fun to run for assembly. And it is a war machine to be elected. So you need petitions. And so when you think about, there are actual significant costs if we have an elected body. Will they be running on party lines? Will they be like a village where it's, save the village line? You're going to have a petition process. You're going to have elections, which cost money unless they're on a cycle, the school board or a general. And now, 6 elections later that I've run through, it is a lot just to get people qualified to specifically run. And then there's campaign finance issues. So there are so many layers to it that in addition to the labor issue, that an elected board is a lot. And this is something that in hindsight, it sounds like a great idea, but when you actually get down into the weeds, like there is a tremendous amount of, there are significant issues that might also include significant cost. So I think that's also a concern that at least I have, and I know some other members have discussed as well.
Totally got it. And 2
Right.
quick notes on what you say, and they're very quick. One, with respect to municipal ownership, many municipalities won't want to own. Of course, some of the risks that you are discussing are addressed with Fred Thiel's legislation, which is that you have guaranteed subscribership at guaranteed rates, so you don't need to worry about the money. The other thing is that you can still be eligible for direct pay if it is a nonprofit. So a local homeless shelter that provides meals for people who are victims of domestic violence is an example in Rochester. You can get access to direct pay to the direct pay features with a nonprofit, even if the municipality decides not to, or the municipality can get lease payments, as I think you're doing here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to hear from Jennifer Harrison and then Grant Newberger.
Hi, thank you, commissioners. I am Jennifer Harrison. I am a resident of Mastic. And every Long Islander needs to pay attention to what is happening here today. I think it's pretty ironic that Senator Thomas, who is ignoring me and is on his phone right now, you're laughing in our faces again like you did with the nursing home deaths, promises that you're going to keep us in mind when you get to Albany, but we know that that's not the case. I obviously am in opposition to this. History has shown that more government can lead to higher costs, and these are costs that Long Islanders cannot afford. My family, like many others, depend on reliable and affordable utilities. With the current economic challenges, including rising costs and inflation, we simply cannot afford the risk leading to increased energy costs. Government-run utilities aren't always the most efficient, and when costs begin to rise, the burden always falls on ratepayers and taxpayers, a double hit to our wallets. Government-initiated changes often come with high costs and complications, and if the service deteriorates, the burden again falls on the taxpayers. Government also isn't known for being efficient. When the government makes changes, it often costs too much and gets too complicated. If things go wrong and service goes down, then we end up paying for it. I am concerned that we don't know what we're signing up for, and that it could mean a higher bill at the end of the month. My family needs reliable, affordable utilities. We're already dealing with rising costs and inflation. We cannot afford the risk and rising energy costs. They always say it will be cheaper, and then in 5 or 10 years from now, service is down and we're paying more taxes. Transitioning to municipalization can be an expensive and could mean delays or disruptions in service. In startup fees alone, ratepayers may end up paying more. Government isn't experienced at running a utility either. So are we going to have to wait for a learning curve or transitional period on how to do their jobs before we can turn lights back on in an emergency? Most importantly, this isn't about the name on the door. This is about the workers who climb lines in storms to keep the lights on, and their futures are placed at risk with this big change. We don't need higher taxes. We need things to stay the same. Otherwise, ratepayers are going to bear the brunt of these costs and outages. I urge you to say no.
Want to apologize for being on the phone, but it was government related. I did hear your testimony. Had a quick question. If we were to, go into a full public mode with Lipa, how would you hold them accountable?
Well, you could create panels, you could create advisory boards, you could write legislation as legislators. There are all kinds of alternatives.
Okay.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Grant Newberger, and after Mr. Newberger is legislator Bridget Fleming.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Grant Newberger on behalf of the Building Construction Trades Council of Nassau and Suffolk Counties. We represent the 36 different unions in the construction industry here on Long Island and have a membership comprised of 65,000 local Long Islanders. I also appear today on behalf of our president, Matty Arasich, who sends his regards that he couldn't be here himself, but I'm here. So
He ruined his perfect attendance right
I
now.
know.
Okay.
He was really looking forward to seeing you again. Anyway, I wish to share our thoughts here in Southampton on the municipalization of Lipa. PCG Long Island, as it stands today, manages a workforce of 25,000 experienced employees. These individuals have tirelessly delivered reliable power across Long Island, and especially those residents throughout the Hamptons. IBW 1049 members within this workforce are tremendously skillful and are individuals who fought to keep the lights on during some of our most dangerous storms and our most pressing times of need. Municipalization jeopardizes the present PCG workforce, their benefits, their pensions, the benefits that they've worked hard throughout their entire careers to accumulate are at risk of disappearing entirely. Their expertise and bravery should not be questioned. However, municipalization places them in a precarious position where they have to renegotiate for their future. Additionally, it should be reminded how greatly affected by municipalization ratepayers and taxpayers will be. I'm sorry. It shouldn't be. It should be stated that we as union members are residents here on Long Island, and we are also ratepayers and taxpayers. We're not just some scary entity. We are the volunteer firefighters. We are the softball coaches. We are your neighbors. Residents here, are already facing the daily burdens of inflation, and talk about looming recession is always part of daily dialogue in every household, and increases in rates, cannot be an option. Beyond the potential severe impacts on workers' lives, the cost estimates are completely speculative. Do these calculations truly account for the unrealized costs 5, 10, 15 years from now? There's no guarantee that municipalization and unrealized costs, including the immediate huge cost of acquiring the utility and its infrastructure, would save already overburdened ratepayers and taxpayers alike. Municipalization of LIPA introduces uncertainties that could undermine efforts to deliver reliable services, negatively impacting consumers and workers' lives. I came here today to carry the message of my brothers and sisters in labor, and I'm proud to stand here in solidarity with those members of IBW 1049. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of points on the labor issue, and again, I'm going to say this without exception. Both sides of the aisle, both houses, the draft report all talks about protecting the workforce. This commission was formed not because there was any dissatisfaction with the performance of the 2,500 members of labor that provide the services. And I've used this anecdote a number of times, whether it was Superstorm Sandy or Isaias. We'd have these phone calls with the suits at National Grid or the suits at PSE&G, and hours of my life I'll never get back. When I wanted to know what was going on in my district, I'd go down to the local substation and find out what was going on, and that's how we found out. So from the beginning, there's been nothing but wanting to protect labor. And that's in the draft report. Nobody's ever talked about Tier 6. Nobody's ever talked about them becoming public employees. The model, or certainly one of the models that was looked at is, right here in this community, down the street, Southampton Hospital, 1,500 workers at Southampton Hospital, $11.99, private sector. And Stony Brook University took them over, public entity. And that legislation that led to the takeover by Stony Brook University, still $11.99, still private sector employees. So you can have a private workforce and still have the public entity. And just the last thing with regard to your testimony, you said that we would have to acquire all of the infrastructure. We don't. We own all the infrastructure. This is about who manages the infrastructure. Is it going to be 9 appointees from Lipa that are appointed in Albany and a company that manages, that's from New Jersey and has their first interest there? Or are we going to take back control over our utility? And to me, that's what it's about. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. If we find, after talking to our attorneys, that we can't protect, there isn't a mechanism to protect the rights of labor and the benefits of labor, this thing will not move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
I stand by what the co-chair says as well.
Thank you. Next is legislator Bridget Fleming. After her will be Tina Jacobowitz.
Hopefully we can still get
Thank you.
appointees from
Good morning. I'm Bridget Fleming. I represent the South Fork in the Suffolk County Legislature. So good morning, Chairperson Field, Chairperson Smith, and the members of the commission. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to address you. I know these hearings are about comments on the draft report. We've heard a lot on the substance of the report. I wanted to just mention about the report itself. It's a terrific product, and I really am grateful to the commission and certainly your staff in putting together this report. It's rare to have, such a cohesive document that has the complex history of LIPA and all the considerations so carefully spelled out. So thank you for that effort. And I wholeheartedly support the conclusion that municipalization of the utility is the best way to go. We're facing a period of enormous economic transition, whether we like it or not, and energy supply is at the dead center of that transition. The utility responsible for our energy supply on Long Island and in Queens has failed. The third-party management structure doesn't exist anywhere else in the power industry. Hybrid management doesn't work. The restoration, communication, and accountability failures following Tropical Storm Isaias are undisputed. They're certainly not contradicted in this record. But it's also just common sense that any third-party management arrangement is basically using ratepayer dollars to achieve a profit for the third-party manager. In addition, running such a large utility through relatively short-term contracts makes long-term planning more difficult and less likely to achieve the goals of ratepayers. For instance, eliminating LIPA's reliance on PSE&G for completing the integrated resource plan alone promises that critically important decisions regarding resiliency will be more likely made in the best interest of Long Island communities rather than in the best interest of the private shareholders. Transition to a public utility will likely result in significant savings. And I have to say I've been a little bit surprised to hear comments that savings might not be meaningful because when divided amongst all the ratepayers, they may not be felt. $50 to $80 million a year is real money. And during a time of transition in energy supply, we've already heard testimony regarding that, and also considering the challenges you face regarding labor and transitioning the workforce, that money may offer options for dealing with these challenges while reducing the burden on ratepayers. With regard to governance, it would appear from an accountability standpoint, which is critically important, especially if you're thinking of reducing or eliminating the role of DPS, and certainly supported by the comparisons and other considerations in your report, it appears that an elected independent board would be ideal. However, I realize that might not be possible given what we've heard and Assemblyman Thiel was just commenting on and Senator Smith agreed with, this universal commitment to preserving the bargain for terms and conditions of employment of the workforce. So I'd ask you to consider a governing board, perhaps comprised of members who are appointed by elected officials, appointed perhaps by members of the state legislature, specifically of Long Island. I don't know if it's possible to create a board in itself that is only members from Long Island that have appointing authority, but I'd ask you to consider that possibility. Consider the importance in our particular circumstance of members being appointed primarily to represent geographic areas. And I'd remind you, I represent the South Fork. We sometimes have some trouble getting heard in the larger bodies of government. It's important because of geography, and I think specifically of resiliency goals, for instance, on the South Shore, in Queens, and the Rockaways, versus inland communities. Operations differences, considering the very varied density that you have in the service area, and the needs and concerns, as well as local communities with differing commitments to the pursuit of alternative energy sources. I'd advocate for use of a citizens advisory committees to advise, I would say, on particular subject areas, like, for instance, resiliency, considering that we're a coastal community, or the transition to clean energy. And I would just note here in Southampton, you've already discussed the great efforts that Southampton municipality has made with regard to community choice aggregation. They're facing real challenges around battery storage. East Hampton is a leader in alternative energy. So I think a community advisory board would be particularly important. The Nature Conservancy on Long Island did a solar roadmap, and we're faced with real challenges in terms of data sharing for the siting or the potential siting of mid to larger scale solar. That could be eliminated with good communication with a board from Citizens Advisory Committee.
Legislator Fleming, just if you could wrap it up.
Sure. In terms of issues regarding labor, I know they're legally and structurally complex. I trust, based on what we've heard and the report, that there is universal commitment to protecting the bargain for wages and quality of life and the pensions of 1049 workers in Servco. This commission, the legislature, will have to work closely with the labor and their attorneys to get that right. But I recognize that this is a critically important effort, particularly at this time for Long Island. I know it's not easy. I'm deeply grateful for your efforts, and I wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bridget, I have a question. Thank you for your testimony. You know, we've heard of this in all four hearings. You know, public versus private. You know, government can't shoot straight. We need a private company to do that. You know, I'm going to give two examples. One is the delivery of another utility, water, and the experience in Suffolk County with the Suffolk County Water Authority versus our friends in Nassau County who had to deal with private water companies, I think it's New York Water, which
Liberty.
Liberty, which required government intervention to help the ratepayers there. And you know, I've kind of identified the Water Authority, Suffolk County Water Authority, as an example of an efficient utility that has, until recently, very reasonable rates, and now they've had to charge a little bit more because of PFAS and PFOA and all the regulations there. But you know, really kind of a model of efficiency, a government model. And on the other side of the coin is that you've got, you know, we take transportation. Let's look at the Long Island Railroad, public, versus the Hampton Jitney, private. Who would you rather be, right? Hampton Jitney. So my point is, yeah, you know, I don't think it's necessarily public versus private. It's the question that Senator Thomas asks every witness, and that is, how do we provide for improved accountability? And I think that's the relevant question, whether this is public or private. So I'm not going to ask his question. I'll let him answer. But I mean, but your experience, I think you have a good experience because you've served on committees, et cetera, with oversight with the Suffolk County Water Authority. Do you share my view? Well-run utility, affordable, typically not on the front page of the newspaper.
Right. No, and it's a great question. First of all, I want to apologize, Senator Thomas. I called you by the wrong name.
It's all good. It's all good.
That's
fine.
But, well, I'll go to the example of the Hampton Jitney. We in Suffolk County run the bus system, the public bus system, and we've recently transitioned to a pilot here on the South Fork, which is a public-private model. We went out to bid with a competitive bidding process, and the Hampton Jitney and a software company won the contract, and they are now running microtransit pretty effectively here on the South Fork. So I think that, and that couldn't be done just in a private model. Public transportation needs to be run as a public agency, and I think it's been fairly successful. I'm not saying that there aren't concerns, and I certainly think you need to look, if you cannot do an elected board which has its own accountability built in, you really need to make sure that you're building accountability in. So if the first step is the elected legislators who are appointing that board, one would hope that you'd be able to build some of that accountability in there. But I'd also take a hard look at DPS's role to eliminate DPS altogether, when you have an appointed board, may present some challenges. They're not easy questions, but I have to admit my brother serves as an elected board member on an electricity board in Colorado. Much smaller, but very highly rated and very effective. Los Angeles has a board that is highly rated with regard to reliability. And I think in your report, you talk about 4 out of 5 of the large utilities that are public are also rated highly in terms of reliability and customer service. So obviously excellence with regard to the folks that you choose to do the work is going to be critically important. But I think there certainly are examples that demonstrate that it is quite possible to do this right in a fully municipalized way.
I didn't ask Senator Thomas this question, but I thank you for answering it.
I had a quick follow-up. Since you brought up the fact that your brother is on, a board out in Colorado, has he ever mentioned how he has been able to hold the utility accountable if they've fallen short on metrics, etc.?
No. I can't give you an example. I wouldn't feel comfortable giving it. I'll tell you what he feels about the Giants. No, but I do think the question is clarity in the governing structure. You need to have clarity in where that accountability lies. Certainly eliminating this multi-layered, management structure gets you a step closer already. I know I've heard concerns. I think the PSE&G representative talked about Superstorm Sandy and how PSE&G, or maybe it was you, Assemblyman Smith, talking about how PSE&G side of things was more responsive than the Lipa side. But I think the critical question was who was in charge. Right. If you can keep circling around and putting blame on the other guy, chances are you're not going to do your job as well as if the buck stops with you.
And I think there's a reason why Long Islanders and the Rockaways are confused about that. I mean, we've had the same third-party model since 1998.
But no one else does.
Yeah, but different companies, but the same model. But, the former governor thought, well, the way we fix that is we're going to rebrand. Even though it's the same model, we're going to put PSE&G on the trucks instead of Lipa. because everybody hates Lipa. We'll try to take a good shot with PSE&G, and you know that's
People tell
branding.
me Lipa does not
that's
exist.
branding. That's not accountability.
Like Lipa doesn't
But-
exist anymore. Yes, it does.
Well, that goes
people,
back.
But the point is, people don't know who's in charge.
Right,
You
that's
know?
very true.
Yeah.
But it also, the question that you asked goes back to my initial comment that this is great work you're doing, because it takes a lot of guts. There is no easy answer, but it's critically important, especially at this moment in Long Island history.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other
Thank
questions?
you.
Oh, wait.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
I like the idea that you raised about trying. No, I wouldn't.
Senator Smith.
I'm an assemblyman. I actually work for a living.
Oops.
No. Sorry, no. Present company excluded. No, but I think you raised an interesting point because, you know, being a service territory of the Rockaways, Nassau, and Suffolk, it's really, really tricky. Rockaways have 35,000 customers. Nassau and Suffolk have, you know, more customers each. So to get a 9-member board that's reflective of every single person that lives and regionally, you brought up an idea, and you know, I wish there was a function. And again, we can't just say this is how it's always been done, so we can't do it this way. But you know, we have 23 or 24 assembly districts that kind of nicely fit over the territory. Maybe that's a thought, but that's a lot of cooks in the kitchen to have to make an appointment. But let me ask you, as your role as a Suffolk County legislator, what is your feeling if, let's say, a 9-member board, let's just take Suffolk, for example, if Suffolk got 2 appointees that were proposed by the county executive and approved or disapproved by the legislature, what are the pros and cons? Because I'm sure you've been through many of these hearings or...
Nope.
Really?
No, I mean, you really are faced with a unique kind of set of challenges.
Are there any boards that, I mean, the Water Authority, the Board of Elections, I'm thinking of boards
Right.
that you have some appointment power. How does that work? Is that very unique?
No, I mean, it's just very different because you have so many municipalities involved in this particular undertaking and such variance with regard to density, goals, resiliency, all those things. It's a big, big territory. So, I mean, I think it does work well for the Water Authority, for instance, for the county executive to propose and the legislature to confirm appointments. But in this case, I would say, you know, is it, as someone suggests, I think 1049 suggested have the borough president of Queens,
Yep.
the county executive of Nassau, the county executive of Suffolk. I think that is it is a possibility, but I would just, particularly since we're here in Southampton Town Hall and you've heard about some of the work that Southampton has done, I would consider that individual localities have such differing
They do.
perspectives that it might be better to consider a larger board. There are boards that are made up of 15 members, but if you had the state legislators comprising a board that would make those appointments of, say, 15 people, then each of those legislators would at least have an opportunity. If you're talking about the Rockaways or if you're talking about Montauk, you have the same issues with regard to coastal resiliency. You have completely different issues with regard to density. So, you know, it's just, there are just too many variations, I think, to effectively run the thing without having local input.
I happen to agree. And actually, yesterday I spent a great deal of time, the entire day, on the North Fork. There was a farm tour where we had folks from New York City senators and assembly members touring some of the great facilities in Fred and Tony's districts. It was great to see and expose that. And absent a Peconic County, which we currently do not have, and again,
I second that motion.
Yeah. So, but you know, I've thought about that, you know, and the fact that Eastern Long Island, and again, I'm more Western Suffolk, even though I'm kind of in the middle with Brookhaven and Islip. The needs are so diverse in the East End of Long Island, and even as part of the county legislature, having you know, a legislator in the North Fork, South Fork, and even in the Assembly, a legislator in the North and South Forks. It really, there's something missing, so we want to make sure everyone's voice is captured. So I guess you're right, that brings up a really interesting thing, because since we don't have a specific body, even, I mean, I know there's a board of, not a board of supervisors, but a supervisors association, but it's very informal and it's in all of Suffolk County, so I guess that's a tricky one, but I agree with your points.
And the diversity isn't just geographic operational considerations. You also have very different commitments to the goals of the CLCPA and to the goals of fossil fuel reduction. And I think those need to be supported, and they're currently not.
It does present a unique or certainly a different set of challenges. Most of the public utilities that we've looked at, as you said, that are very highly rated, many of them, but they're single entity jurisdictions, right? Like, you know, somebody mentioned, you did, I think, Los Angeles, Sacramento was the model for Long Island Power Authority originally, but, you know, it's one government, one locality, so that makes making the appointments a little bit easier. You know, like the Suffolk County Water Authority, county executive proposes, you confirm, but when you've got multiple jurisdictions, 3 counties basically, and a lot of towns and a really lot of villages. Villages believe they have a role in this process too. They're on our advisory committee. That in devising a system for the governing board, it does present some challenges.
And don't forget the school boards. When you talk about micro grids, we have talked about microgrids and the importance, especially in extreme weather events, of having school districts, capable of forming their own solutions. I mean, those are important to hear from too.
And Doug, I can put you down as a co-sponsor of the Pecana County bill.
Let's do it. I'm in.
All right. Thank you, Bridget.
Thank you for your effort.
Thank you. Next is Tina Jacobowitz,
Out of this rat race.
and then Luis Mendez.
He ain't Pecana County. Hello.
Hello.
My name is Tina Jacobowitz, and I am a resident of Watermill. I am the treasurer of PEER, which is the Progressive East End Reformers. We are a local grassroots organization established approximately 8 years ago, and we focus primarily on Eastern Suffolk and the East End. PEER is a member of NIPAN, the New York Progressive Action Network. 2 of the main issues that we address in PEER are climate change and protection of our most vulnerable populations, and Lipa Going Public supports the mission of our group. We strongly support having 100% renewable energy, especially because, as we all know, we live in a very sensitive region of the country. Going fully public will expedite this transition. Additionally, going fully public will better position LIPA to meet the needs of poor people, seniors on fixed incomes, people with disabilities, and other vulnerable groups. Speaking for myself as a resident of Watermill, my electric bills are outrageous. We knew when we purchased our home in 1994 that having a fully electric house would be expensive. However, we never expected our bills to be between $500 and $600 a month. We don't live in a McMansion. Our house is small, and each room has its own thermostat. We never heat or cool all of the rooms, only the ones we live in. For these reasons, PEER and I strongly support a fully public LIPA. This action will lower our rates, provide more transparency, and allow more opportunities for local input, which is crucial. Let's make it happen. I urge the Commission to introduce legislation in time to pass in the 2024 legislative session. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if anyone's interested in PEER, I have some cards to give out.
Thank you. Questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you
very much.
Next is Luis Mendez, and then Nick Michaels. Michelli. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the board.
Mr. Mendez, you did preserve your perfect attendance.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And by the way,
Deserves a gold star.
let me start by saying thank you for your time and attention to those of you who might not know. My name is Luis Mendez. I'm the former Deputy Director of the Nassau County Office of Minority Affairs. And also, I'm one of the founding members of Empowering Young Professionals. I will be missing you guys next week when I no longer have to travel throughout Nassau, Suffolk, and Queens, for that matter.
We will miss you too.
But the one thing that I can tell you is, going by the regions of Long Island, I realized not only the impact, the diversity, and also the needs are different in each community. I'm going to take some time to kind of read something to you guys that, as a matter of fact, you should all have in front of you. LIPA President Thomas Falcone, who's the Chief Executive Officer, sent me a letter yesterday, dated yesterday, emailed me the letter, and that letter also went to Rory Lankman, who's the Executive Director for the Legislative Commission on the Future of LIPA. Apparently, they are calling a canard on me. based on my testimony to you guys about MWBE and the lack thereof as far as Lipa. They claim that Lipa now has a compliance, it's in full compliance with Article 15A, and that I've been giving you misinformation or that someone gave me misinformation. Well, I'm an expert on MWBE, right? And so you can have compliance without having participation, especially when the entity they cited is the, as you know, the Empire State Development Corporation, which all of you must have problems with your constituents being able to get certified over at least a year's backlog, right? So getting endorsed by the Empire State Development Corporation is sort of like getting endorsed, getting an award or giving an award to the Polluters Association for discharging green pollution, meaning pollution that is in the color of green. And so I want to just make sure that we take a look at this letter and look at and dive into the numbers to kind of give you an expert's perspective. When I was the executive director or the project director of the compliance of the capital improvements plan in Nassau County, I could have easily achieved compliance. All I have to do is give out waivers that we didn't find any minority entities, and I will be compliant with the state's mandate, and therefore I did not meet the goals, but I complied with the law. That's nice, but you will understand that both the representatives from Queens and from Elmont and Senator Thomas know that compliance is not participation. And if you look at the numbers in Lipa, their budget was $3.9 billion last year, with roughly about $783 million in addition to for their capital improvements plan. Based on this letter, you would think that at least $234 million, that is 30% of the capital improvements plan, which is the mandate by the state on 15A, would be met. But that's not the case. And I would love to work with Tom Falcone, who identified this and reached out to me yesterday prior to getting the email. Hopefully we can dive into the numbers and take a look as to whether or not this letter means compliance or compliance and participation. So I took at least a minute to let you know that. So now let me get to my testimony. We're here talking about some real numbers. And the real numbers are, what does this represent? LIPA's budget of $3.9 billion only it's impacted by 2.2%, which is $85 million, which is the fee that's paid to, roughly the fee that's paid to PSE&G. That represents only 2.2% of the actual budget that LIPA manages, based on the numbers that we're talking about, 85 million, right? That means that each ratepayer will save, if we go to municipalization, will save roughly about $2 to $3 a month. In Nassau County, that's almost $2.90 is what a bus ride costs you. So that's about 12 bus rides a year. But let's take a look at the history of LIPA. Cronyism, corruption. You can look and look at the New York Times and Newsday on the corruption that has been rampant over the period of 2013 all the way to 2017, specifically with the leadership of LIPA. And so the reason why we have a model here on Long Island that kind of exerts what happens around the country is because of the fact that we don't know how to run things from a governmental perspective, because eventually it becomes a nepotism, a cronyism, appointment of political hacks. So I want to thank you for your time, and I just want to let you know two things about this, right? Number one is I've submitted almost 50 letters and testimony of real ratepayers. I've been to every single one of the hearings, and the numbers have not changed. We still are only saving between $2 and $3 a month, which I would say to you that the cost of getting it wrong will be far greater than those $2 to $3. And so if you get it right, make sure that you do the following things, at least as I recommend. Number one, language access. We have a growing minority diverse community that speaks Creole, Punjabi, Spanish, and any other language that happens throughout Long Island and Queens as far as the diversity of the area represented. Number two, it's more clearly defined the scope of work on the bids. Right, we complain about PSE&G, which happens to be just a vendor, similar to National Grid and any other entity that has come before us. But if you notice that they have mentioned in this testimony to you that they got the bid right by renegotiating and now becoming a sort of, hey, you do the right thing, you get paid. If you fail, you lose. And so that model, if it continues, you'll get to a point where it could be run effectively. Right? So think about it from this perspective. The responsibility of putting out the bid is on government. I've managed bids in Nassau County, which is a $2.3 billion entity. But it's the responsibility of the scope of work that then delegates the ability to have a successful relationship. in a private partnership, in a public-private partnership. And then finally, I want to make sure that we talked about governance, right? And that governance means think about the diversity, think about the districts, think about the language access, and put people on those boards that not only represent the districts that you represent, but also the diversity and the impact of those communities. So, I would gladly, serve on those community boards if you ever put one together with a strong voice, as I've shown over the last, 4 meetings, because it is important for you to understand that the minority communities, the impact of that bill that comes on a monthly basis is significant. $340 is a lot of money to pay on a monthly basis for folks that are either on fixed income or folks that are, working 2 jobs to be able to make ends meet on Long Island. So thank you for your time, by the way.
Thank you very much.
Questions? Doug?
How would you respond to LIPA officials when they point out that, in their opinion, and following the hearing in Nassau County, I went on their website and read some of the reports, they're pointing out that PSEG Long Island fell down on almost every single metric, not every, but a majority of the metrics. Do you think that maybe the metrics are either poorly written? Like, what is your take on?
2 things similar to this letter that I received. Right, there's 2 ways to skin the cat. One is to hope that things will happen, or one is to make sure that paper is done right in a bidding process to make sure that we get what we want. Every single one of your concerns could be addressed in a bid, as long as it's delineated properly.
Yeah. Now, I will say to their credit. And again, not to ask you something that you're not necessarily prepared for, but looking at how they did this, they explained every single metric that PSEG Long Island failed on, and then there was a dollar amount attached. So they said, you didn't, take up the double poles. If there are poles being repaired, they fell short of like 120 poles, and then they lost $100,000. So like every metric had an exact dollar figure of where they met. So I mean that was pretty well laid out, but. Do you think, what are your thoughts on that? Can that be done better?
On accountability, right? When I was managing the capital improvements plan, I would sit down with every single one of the entities that were participating, the big ones, the Pratt Brothers, the J.D. Basilicos of the world. And my job was to make sure that I stayed ahead of the curve, making sure that I didn't identify things once they had happened. It's preventive, right? And one of the things about government, as you know, is it's reactive, not proactive. And I think that a lot of times we fail to have that proactivity, specifically when it comes to providing utility work to the community, right? What I've seen work effectively in my community, I live right behind Eisenhower Park, where the lines go in back of the houses, right? They're not in the front, and they're not underground. I've seen an effective plan to be able to trim down the trees, right? That is preventive. Knowing that a storm might come, I don't worry about losing power. During Sandy, I lost power for about 15 days. I was a member of the East Meadow Fire Department. And the only reason why we got the power back after 15, 16 days is I identified a child who was type 1 diabetic, which meant that they needed a refrigeration, right? So immediately they came in, about 15 trucks came in, and they fixed the lines. And so I think that proactivity, being able to anticipate the problems that we already know will happen on Long Island. There will be another storm. And the one thing that I could point out is no governor and no local county executive and no town supervisor is going to want to have to answer for these problems directly, right? They can always blame PSE&G, right? So from a political perspective, that only represents 2.2 percentage of the budget, the total budget of LIPA, which means that we cannot afford to get it wrong. If we get it wrong, rates will go sky high, and then who will be left to bear that responsibility will be the elected officials, and that's a hot potato. I'm sorry, but I just bring you a little bit of reality.
Thank you, Louis. I appreciate you, being chair of, the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus. We take MWBE participation very seriously, even as we look at all the legal challenges that are happening with that program. And so, when you mentioned that last week, and when I heard, I took that very seriously and reached out to all parties, including ESD, to see what we can do with compliance and also participation, as you said. I actually have some of the numbers up here, but lo and behold, what are some suggestions that you have to increase participation? And also, do you know of any businesses that had issues regarding contracting with LIPA or PSE&G?
Thank you, Legislator Salages.
Assemblywoman Salage,
yes. 2 things. The first one is participation. How do you increase participation? Obviously, fix the backlog over at Empire State Development.
No, I mean with LIPA, specifically
right.
LIPA and PSE&G.
So specific to LIPA engagement, right? Tomorrow I'm meeting at 11 a.m. I'm meeting with 2 snow contractors that are minority firms, right? They want to be able to have accessibility. They don't know how to navigate the process of reaching out to LIPA, having that, concerted effort to make sure that they participate in the cleanup processes of the snow within the facilities of LIPA, right? They have a lot of facilities, whether or not they have a snow removal contract, that's yet to be seen. We got to find out if the main contractor has complied with, in Nassau County Appendix E, which is the participation of minority contractors within county contracts. And so number one is outreach. Number two is having a pool of qualified entities, and that's where the challenge is. The reason why I'm able to tell you that LIPA is not compliant with participation is because there ain't enough entities that are out there. So the utilization capacity doesn't meet the goals of 30%. Perfect example in Nassau County, if we only look at the 50-mile radius of usually most of the studies that are made, you're talking about at least at most 7.5 to 8% participation within the qualified entities that are in that jurisdiction. So we have to expand that outreach to be able to catch all. And then not only that, you have to then provide diversity supplier conferences so that you're meeting proactively, you're meeting those minority vendors and meeting them up with the main contractor so that it gives them the ability to talk before the contract is out. And then all of a sudden work starts.
Well, I thank you. When Speaker Hasty made this last appointment to the LIPA board, we actually appointed someone with that specialty to look at MWBEs, and we've been doing that. And so, we'll continue the conversation offline.
And by the way, the impact of MWBEs is a cyclical economy. Those dollars stay here on Long Island. I participated during Sandy in a $12 billion project. If you're familiar with Operation Splash, which was the cleanup of all the sandy debris on the south shore of Long Island, that was a process by which 32 Nassau County residents were not employed prior to that received that benefit of being able to be employed during the cleanup. And so that was great because it gave that money back to Nassau County. $12 million stayed on Long Island. So think about a contract that employs people from the Hamptons, right? That money will then go back to the delis, will go back to the restaurants and help folks pay. So this is a cyclical economy that benefits. The MWBE program, when it's done right, gives you the ability to employ those who might not otherwise have opportunities.
And I think to that point, the more people who bid on a contract, the better, because you have a better opportunity. So if we're lacking the bid, the people putting in a bid, that's a
I
problem.
agree with you. And then more important than that is, even if they don't get the bid, if they are minorities, they still are able to participate within that bid. And that is the key component to that. And I want to thank you all for the work that you've done. And anything that I could do and my entity could do to make sure that we advance the participation of minorities in state contracts, that would be great.
Thank you.
Oh, I got it.
Oh, you have a question?
No, comment, maybe a question. Louis, I want to thank you. I appreciate your voice in the last 4 hearings that we've had.
I've enjoyed this working with you. This is the first time
Yes.
since your election, so I'm looking forward to continuing working.
Absolutely. And the points that you bring up, especially in the last hearing where Tom Falcone actually spoke up when he shouldn't have, but he sent you a letter. I do not have a copy of that, Rory.
I can have your staff.
Yeah.
The letter?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I could send it.
Yeah, I would love to see that.
It makes me
And
feel important, but
no. It's important to me that the head of LIPA decided to send you that letter saying that he's in compliance. He's not here to talk about this, so we should have further conversations on all
and
of
by the way,
this.
remember, compliance might mean basically compliant, not participation.
No, I completely get it, but for him to put that in writing and send it to you, I would like to know more about that. But thank you for being here. Thank you for bringing others into this to talk about their views as well. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we are hearing from Nick Michelli and then Lynn Arthur.
Thank you all. I will be brief. Tilapia, corn, oh no, that's my shopping list, wait a second. I want to thank my dear wife, Tina Jacobowitz, for her comments. She is my wife. She gave me permission to not wear a tie, not wear a jacket, and wear jeans, so thank you, Tina.
And apparently the grocery list
And
also.
well, that's later, that kind of follows. Tina and I just finished a book on social justice, which is scary to a lot of people. We did it with 6 of our doctoral students. Social justice is not about taking people's money and giving it to somebody else. It's about living a life of equity and living a life of non-discrimination and being concerned about other people, and you are doing just that. This is a social justice project, making certain that prices are right, that rates are right, and that they're fair. So this is very much consistent with what we're concerned about. And in fact, I have an editorial in this week's Southampton paper in which we argue about the role of social justice and the vote, and we argue about the importance of housing and of climate and the cost of these things. We got to get people out to vote. This is a very important election coming up. We hear all about 2024. We know that's a big one, but our daily lives are affected by the election that's happening and by your work. So pushing to make sure that our election is out there fully is absolutely critical, and I urge that you all join me in trying to get that vote out. And I just want to also end by thanking Jay Schneiderman for his wonderful service. You know, he's aging out. But I have a new career for him. He and I are both drummers. We're both drummers, and we're going to start a new band with 2 drummers, right? There you go.
Lame ducks will call the band.
Yeah, lame ducks. And also, John Bouvier, is he still here? John, thank all of you for your service. I appreciate it very much. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Lynn Arthur. Oh, I'm sorry. Are there questions or anything? No. Next is Lynn Arthur. Thank you very much. Mhm.
You guys have funny people.
Hi, I'm Lynn Arthur. I'm a resident of Southampton. I also happen to be a volunteer on the town sustainability committee. I'm a small business owner. Peak Power Long Island is a not-for-profit that helps municipalities with their renewable energy policies and programs, and I'm a NYSERDA subcontractor. I want to thank you for coming and once again hosting the meeting here. It's not very often that we, have important entities like, this come all the way out here to listen to our views. It's important to us, for our local voices to be heard, and so thank you for that. And thank you for the important work that you're doing. So, almost 5 years ago, I attended a conference in Westchester designed to communicate the results of a successful pilot for the first community choice aggregation program that saved an estimated $15 million for 130,000 customers in aggregate over 2 years. CCA, stated simply, was a 2016 Department of Public Service order that enabled a municipality under home rule to select the default supplier of energy for its residents and small businesses. This experience motivated me to action. I decided in that moment to introduce this program on Long Island, and I made it my business to develop a relationship with the company, Jewel Community Power, who worked closely with the 20 municipalities who were part of that pilot, and with the assistance of DPS, who together with, in this case, Jewel, shepherded CCA into existence. Assemblyman Thiel, do you remember the first meeting almost 5 years ago when Councilman Bouvier and I approached you and asked for your guidance in bringing CCA to Southampton?
I do. It resulted in legislation.
Exactly. Well, in the next 30 days, the Southampton Town Board will be faced with a big decision. They will be faced with at least four options for electricity supply. 2 will represent renewable energy options. 1 will represent a standard option, which is, by the way, currently 93% fossil fuels. And the 4th option is to do nothing, but accept the business-as-usual power supply from Lipa. I've been told the renewable options will remove, or expected to remove, 100,000 metric tons of greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere, which, by the way, is the equivalent of taking 22,000 cars off the road per year. That's basically the size of Southampton's load. Senator Palumbo, at the last hearing you referenced, and today as well, your participation in the CLCPA hearings. But I think by now everybody knows how important reducing greenhouse gases is to New York State's environmental objectives. Now, in addition, we're expecting a fixed price over a period of time we think could be 18 months 2 years, who knows? The bids are due in a couple of weeks. If you've ever refinanced your mortgage, then you know if interest rates are forecasted to rise, for example, 10% in 2024 and an additional 10% in 2025, wouldn't that motivate you to lock in a fixed rate now? Well, that's exactly what is forecasted by energy markets. But I'm assuming you all know that gas prices recently were referenced by the New York Times as being one of the primary factors driving inflation. So what does CCA or the community solar project being undertaken by the Southampton Town Board have to do with the Commission's mission? Oh, by the way, that community solar array, we've been talking a lot about solar arrays and different municipalities on Long Island looking at putting solar arrays in exchange for lease payments on their landfills. Well, our solar array is expected to generate free bill credits for Southampton residents. Approximately 500 to 700 households are expected to be selected as a result of a lottery to receive a guaranteed 10% off their electric bill for 20 years. And oh, by the way, the intention, I understand, by the town board is to prioritize low income as the first recipients for those bill credits. So my point is simple. In closing, I stand with your recommendation that the Lipa board be appointed and not elected. Only then can individuals with the right operational as well as technological expertise be put in a position to perpetuate policies and programs that encourage the replication of the leadership Southampton Town has demonstrated by fighting for and launching these two programs. Assemblyman Thiel, you know better than anyone sitting on this panel just how hard we've worked over the last 4 years, participating in no less than 6 Department of Public Service proceedings and 2 bills that you authored and that were subsequently signed by the governor. It is absolutely critical to our future on Long Island that the right appointments be made. And I point to experts like Mike Gordon, who you heard from earlier, as evidence. We are at a historic moment. When CCA launches in Southampton, and I hope it will be the first time in the history of Long Island that we have competition for electricity. So with the support from the Lipa board, we could repeat that success all over Long Island.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just a question. Yeah, as you've stated, I know how hard you've worked on this project in Southampton, and thanks to the leadership of the supervisor and the town board, it's really moved forward. I know you're involved beyond Southampton. Do you have any sense of other towns, other local governments on Long Island that are pursuing this or looking at this at least?
Yes. In fact, when I first started this, when we met 5 years ago, I met with every East End, the boards, the town boards, and everyone was interested, but they weren't so interested in being first. As you know, Brookhaven stepped into the water, but they did their CCA focused on gas a couple of years ago. Now, gas prices, unfortunately, have risen recently, and so CCA as a program, I think, is getting a black eye because the benefits that, were referenced in the press and that were maybe encouraged or promised by the leadership there were not realized. But gas prices are about to rise, and we know that energy prices track very closely to gas prices. So we know from what's happening that over the course of the next 2 years, gas prices are going to rise and energy prices are going to rise. So in Brookhaven's case, again, when you make a decision like this, you have to look at it over the horizon of the term. If the term is 2 years, you're not looking at the decision at a moment in time. Right now, the prices that are going to be offered might not meet the expectation, but if gas prices are going to rise, setting a fixed price now will yield benefits over the period of time, in this case, 2 years. So in Brookhaven's case, I think the criticism that Ed has received, will turn around in about 6 months. Everyone is interested in it. There's no doubt. And I meet with environmental leaders, more. Like I talk to my counterparts in Southold, I've talked to the county, the people running for county legislature. They've come to my presentations, my educational presentations, where I talk about the program in detail. They are very interested in this, but we have an election in just a few months, so we have to wait until after that to see where it goes. But as far as the gentleman on the commission, whose name escapes me, from the Far Rockaways, he actually asked me for a meeting, and I contacted his office, but we haven't been able to get together.
Maybe Senator Sanders?
Yeah,
Senator
yeah,
James
exactly.
Yeah, we have two members from the Rockaways.
Yeah, and I've
Definitely not
also, I've
Assembly
met with
member Khalil
people in Long Beach have brought me in. So I influenced Hempstead, I've spoken, everybody's interested, it's just, the first one is always the hardest. And oh, by the way, this is the first electricity
Right.
CCA. Also, our community solar efforts. This is a CDG community solar project, which is being conducted under the Lipa tariff, and it's also the first of its kind on Long Island. It's the first time a municipality, a town board, has taken on a project of this nature, and they're going to have direct control over how they would like to redistribute those bill credits, which is a beautiful model, and that's what Mike Gordon was talking about earlier.
Doug?
Yeah, so this has fascinated me. Again, I represent Brookhaven, so I've heard mixed reviews of the people I represent. They weren't understanding what community choice aggregation was, so I had to explain that to them, that there's an opt-out if they were concerned and that they could look into this. But when we look at true municipal electrics on Long Island, you're talking about Greenport, Freeport, Rockville Center. And for years, they've been looked at as a model of an example where you can actually deliver lower cost electric. And I know, a lot of people on Long Island have said, well, we're on Long Island as well. Why can't we benefit from the cheaper electric that they benefit from? Mm-hmm. So I think that what you're doing, and I'm really interested to see how Southampton continues on this, because this could be like a next generation municipal electric thought process.
I'm getting calls now. East Hampton has contacted me. Southampton Village has contacted me. Right after our bids are in and the town board makes a decision, I have committed to them, let's have that meeting that you've asked for. Shelter Island is interested. It's really just a matter of, 30 days from now, we'll know.
And for years, I know myself and even my predecessor in my representative seat, Al Graff, we had spent many years looking at municipal and meeting with supervisors, and the biggest criticism that we heard from supervisors, some of whom you mentioned, were that, if they were to, in some fashion, if the state were to, make true municipal electrics, they didn't want to take the LIPA debt with them. So I think that I agree.
Yeah, this enables that not to happen. In fact, we wouldn't be anywhere near where we are today if we didn't have a CCA administrator, because it's the brilliance and the experience of Jewel Community Power. They're providing at no cost to the town all this guidance, leadership. I mean, we're telling them, it's sort of like they're sharing with us, well, this is what you could do, and we're saying, well, yeah, we have this land that's not, that's underwater, it's our landfill, and it's costing us more, than it had in previous years, and gee, yeah, solar array might be a good idea.
And that's similar in that other municipalities have power generating plants. This would be Southampton's similarly, power generating entity, right?
Except that it doesn't come with the risk or the cost.
Right.
So this model, which exists today, and we can execute it on it despite what happens here.
Right.
But I would hope, and so let me.
Yeah, can you break it down? So assuming that the town board selects one of these plans,
Mm-hmm.
The average ratepayer, who's going to be on their electric bills? Is it going to be one of these entities, and there's sunk costs because you're still paying?
Actually, the bill, everything stays the same.
Okay.
Before I answer your question,
Sorry,
I do want to
please.
shout out, if I could, I want to say a positive thing about LIPA. I've been very critical in the past of my testimony. Tom Falcone and his team have been no less than helpful. I wouldn't say enthusiastic, go that far, but they have responded to everything we've asked them to do on a timely fashion, as best as they can, since January 1st. It's a complete change, seriously, complete change. Nancy Goroff has been incredibly helpful when we've had bumps in the road, or there's this PSEG LIPA thing going on. You said you're going to do this, you didn't do it on time, we're going to fine you, blah, 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 throw my hands. That's behind us. Now we're working together cooperatively, and PSEG actually has on their website an advertisement for CCA. You can go to the PSEG Long Island website, put in the search bucket bar, CCA, and you'll get their program and how to onboard with a lot of details. So my hat's off to the team. They've been excellent. They've supported the town. I understand exceptionally well. But back to your question. So with the new change of consolidated billing, which became available on January 1st, what happens is whoever gets selected by the town board, the billing goes right through PSEG accounting system. The homeowner will get the same bill. There'll be just a different line. You know, we don't know exactly how it will look yet, but it'll be integrated on the bill. They still are going to do the capacity planning, you know, trim the trees, collect the money.
And you're still paying those fees as well. So that is still being paid for. The debt is still being paid for. This is just now, as you mentioned, going forward, you may actually see a dip where everyone else is seeing an increase, essentially.
Yes.
Perhaps.
Perhaps we'll
to,
see. Well,
yeah.
again, the benchmark, when you do this kind of competitive bidding, the benchmark is the trailing 12-month average. So, and that's published. It's on their website. You know, it's basically in fact, the Department of Public Service limits the decision that the board can make to the trailing 12-month average plus 5%. If they pick for default supply, and let me talk about default supply in a second. If they pick a default supply that is a conventional, meaning it's conventional right now is 90% fossil fuels and 10% renewable, if the town board should pick that option, they're limited to, in this case, it's 8.7 cents. That's the number. That's the for us. That's the number.
Yeah.
Yes.
But if they pick as default a renewable option, there is no bound. Now, a key thing to understand with CCA, despite what the town board picks as default, every homeowner and small business gets the opportunity to pick any of the other options. So if the town board selects...
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, everyone...
That's interesting.
Everyone gets that choice.
So it's not just an opt-out, you actually have the three other options?
Yes, yes. The town board picks the default supply, and the majority of people will not change.
Right, they'd have to opt out.
And that's how the bidders look at it. And what we hope and what we're advocating for, and what many, you know, environmental groups are advocating for, is we would really, really like the town board, no pressure, Jay. We would really, really like the town board to pick at least the 50% renewable option, because quite honestly, 50% is going to be a little more expensive, we expect, than the conventional, maybe a penny more a kilowatt hour, but 50% is actually 100%. It just so happens in New York State, there's a law whereby you can't call a product 100% renewable unless 100% is generated in New York State.
Right.
But the 50% option is 100% because the other 50% comes from Pennsylvania, somewhere in the West, you know, maybe New Jersey.
My last question, I apologize for monopolizing, but I find this fascinating. Who is engaging in the power supply contracts? Is that still Lipa and PSEG, or is that the entity that the town's hiring?
That's a really good question. It's actually a tri-party agreement between the town board, Jewel Community Power, and the electric service company that wins the bid.
Okay, thank you.
And at no charge to the town, Jewel, in this case, was selected as a result of a competitive bid 2 years ago to be the CCA administrator. They'll continue to monitor that at no charge.
I wonder if are they subject to the LIPA Act because it's in the LIPA service territory, or?
Gee, that's kind of, I don't know.
Sorry. All right, we'll
I don't know.
look into that further. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Just one quick question. Thank you so much for your testimony and also for reaching out. I know my colleague, Senator Sanders, we both represent the Rockaways, and we're always happy to have you all come on down and tell us what you're cooking.
Yeah.
But in any case, you know, I'm learning about this CCA, and I know you all have it here in Suffolk County, but the boundaries are more clearer in Suffolk County. You have towns, you have hamlets, you have, you know, in New York City, it's a little different. I mean, the Rockaways is the only part of the city that is powered by PSEG. The rest is Con Edison. And so I'm just wondering, like, how the boundaries are decided in the CCA agreement.
Are you referring to the the utility in this case.
Yes.
So in Westchester, it just so happens there were originally 16 municipalities that grew to 20. 20 municipalities that spanned across 2 jurisdictions, NYSEG and Con Ed.
Mm-hmm.
So it really, there's no, as long as the utilities have the wherewithal, for example, to deal with consolidated billing, you know, a billing services agreement, data security agreement, things of that are required to launch a CCA. And we happen to know that Con Ed is already participating in Westchester, so that should not be an issue.
But I guess my question is, who sets the jurisdiction?
Who's the town of Southampton in this, in
Right.
the service area in Queens?
Right, right.
Who's the local government?
Right.
I'm not sure I understand the question, Mike.
Would it go
Can you
neighborhood
comment?
by neighborhood, or does it have to be a
Yeah,
distinct
right,
entity?
right.
Yeah.
That's
Like if he
Who makes
wants
the decision?
Yeah. Like if he wants his 35,000 customers, if they were interested in CCA, they're within Queens, so they're kind of, it's not a distinct entity.
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Come up here.
Oh, sure.
Come up here.
Because it's interesting, right? It's 35,000 customers, but it's like 11 neighborhoods.
Yep. So
And
it
3 zip
is
codes.
the town for the unincorporated portions of the town. It is the village for the incorporated portions of the village, of the town. And then it is the city. So one of those 3 entities is the decision-making.
So would it be the city council for this area of Queens? The entire city council?
Yes, if it is in Queens, it will have to be
East
a
Queens.
local law passed by New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And they can enable local community boards, for instance, in their law construct to make
Yeah.
decisions, but ultimately, it is their decision. It is the city in Queens.
Yeah.
It is if it's an unincorporated portion of the town, it's the town. That will have no impact on incorporated villages if the town makes that decision. As in this case, it won't have an impact on the incorporated village of Southampton, but the incorporated village of Southampton would need to make that decision independently.
Got it. So we're viewed as New York City as one jurisdiction.
Yes.
Got it. That's the answer to my question. Thank you so much.
Could that help, like, we've talked about microgrid. Senator Sanders mentioned maybe
Right.
doing a microgrid. That sounds like that could be actually very helpful
Yes.
for a CCA program, you know, to, okay.
Yeah,
That's cool.
And
Yeah,
the CCA
definitely.
can actually act as the off-taker of a microgrid, which then allows financing for that microgrid construct.
Yeah, we definitely should talk after the meeting. Thank you so much. After the hearing, rather.
All right, thank you very much. That concludes our hearing. Ms. Arthur was our last witness testifying, and, yes, sir? I apologize. What's your name? What's your name?
Ron Leonard.
All right, did you fill out a form?
I signed up on the.
My apologies. You're up. To close.
We'll have to tie this all together, that's wonderful. So, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We all deserve a good pat on the back because we're doing good work and making things happen. I'm here talking to you for a organization I started in 2000, which is called the Renewable Energy Coalition. I also had companies in New York State. My company, Bessie Corp, was the largest producer of solar thermal systems, was the largest independent power producer in New York State, eventually people responsible for about 2 gigawatts of power plants, and was also the largest distributor of photovoltaic equipment in the United States. And I think I can talk authoritatively about some of the issues that you really are correctly asking about. The good news, which is the first part of my testimony, is that you're not alone. And by that I mean there is a issue in Maine with 2 utilities, CMP and Versant, that is very similar to what we have here in Long Island. They are the lowest rated utilities in the United States. That's not a good place to be. And the state of Maine, a senator from, Republican senator, Democratic senator, put a law together 2 years ago, and they're going to vote in a month, I believe, to see if they can set up a municipal entity for the entire state to provide power. So you're not alone. You're also making a correct decision in terms of where we are going in the future. We really need to understand that this cost that we absorb every year in the utility bill is a cost on many levels. It's a cost of pollution, it's a cost of living, and it's a cost of safety. And I think we're ill-served with the present method of providing that commodity power. And I would suggest that your method of doing it is the correct one. The way that I see you offering fundamental reform and fixing real issues like global warming is sort of similar to what Cuomo was faced with a while ago. He had a fun phrase that I'd like to repeat. He said, "I'm serious as a heart attack." Now, I would never have used that phrase, but he used it, and he was talking about revoking the Charter of Utilities. I think it's probably a smart idea to consider that fundamental reform is the way you got to go. And if you don't want to worry about how power comes to you in the future, if you don't worry about whether we should see lower costs, keep the same model that we have now. It's basically Einstein's theory of insanity. Keep doing the same thing again and again, expecting different results. It's not going to happen. You're doing the right result, the right action. Lipa bought Lilco in '98. We still have a $400 million debt based on that contractual obligation, mostly from Shoreham. Not a good thing to continue, but we can get out from under by making the change that you're proposing. Lipa told your friends out here in Rockaway is that they've hardened the substation in Rockaway by raising it above 5 feet of the 500-year flood, 50-year flood, I'm not sure which. But 5 feet, in my estimation, I should know something about it. I've been involved with suing New York City about issues with water, we probably have a more of a problem than 5 feet in terms of floodplain issues here in Long Island. And we really should consider what is the long-term solution. That really is local power, renewable energy in the grid, in the load pocket, which does a couple of things. It reduces the cost of electricity. Our friend Carl Rabago showed that with a study in New York State. It also hardens the grid. It enables you to respond quicker to an emergency and switch things around quickly. And I think technology is at a point where we can actually use it immediately in a crisis. And I can prove that by you looking at this little device, which is an iPad. And if you imagine this iPad that's 12 years old, back then in the day, not as capable as this one. And there was a guy in Central Hudson who had that iPad with the entire grid of Central Hudson on that iPad in 3D. And he actually invented a thing called a phaser, which was manufactured by Central Hudson, put them out in the grid, and he was able to walk around anywhere in Central Hudson's grid and fix problems instantly. So technology is really not the issue. The issue is not the cost of renewable energy. It's just putting it in place and using it appropriately. And if you have a new entity that has the choice of saving energy, saving the environment, and serving ratepayers in the forefront, you really can move quickly. And let me give you the last hint in terms of how to move quickly.
Yeah, this needs to be the conclusion. Thank you.
So the hint is that we proposed to LIPA in 2020 to do a grid study, a study having to do with work that was done in the mid-ISO by Mark Perez, and the study enabled them to understand how they can efficiently do 100% renewable energy on the grid. 100% renewable energy. So that's not a goal, it's a practical solution. We can show you numerically how to do it, and I encourage you to move it forward with exactly what you're doing, because I can prove to you that we could do this now. I can prove to you that we have access to capital. I can prove to you that this will work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Thank you.
Thanks.
That is the close. Before the chairs close it out, just want to remind everyone that this was the last public hearing. We are having an advisory committee meeting next week, which the public is allowed to attend and observe, but not participate in. There's no opportunity for testimony, and then we will be issuing our report by the end of November. Co-chairs?
All right. Well, this was a very productive hearing. Thank you to everyone that testified today. And looking forward to the next meeting next week with our advisory committee, and looking forward to the final report.
Thank you, Senator, and thanks to all my colleagues for making the long trip, especially from the Rockaways. I appreciate you all being here today. I want to thank the town of Southampton for being our hosts and for their participation here today. Lame duck, it's okay, Jay. But one thing to point out, it's never happened, certainly during my tenure, but in the East End, we're going to have 5 new town supervisors and 2 new county legislators.
Wow.
It's like, I feel like I didn't get the memo or something, right? But anyway, I want to thank the town and Jay for
Still hanging on.
so. And as Rory said, we still have a lot of work to do. We've got our advisory committee meeting, the final report, and I should mention that also includes the legislation, the proposed legislation that would implement this. And it may be the end of this phase, but it's really just the beginning of this process. People think, the commission does its final report, and that's the end of it. Well, the legislative process in Albany, it's just the beginning of that part, and that is, a whole separate stage of this. So, again, thank you for all of you that participated, and we certainly will be back in the future with that final report. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And can the tech kill the mic, please?